welcome to the latest in our series of Meet the Meforshim. Just hold this up for the cameras once again. We have been studying, I hope to general satisfaction and edification, the lives and the contributions and the legacy, life and early Torah personalities. Last week we did possibly the most famous of them all, Rambam. And tonight we're doing Ramban. Now Ramban and Rambam are often mentioned together, partly because their names can be easily confused. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon is Maimonides. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman is Nahmanides. So Rambam and Ramban, for whatever the reason, we tend to say Rambam and Ramban. So it's a way to distinguish them. Whether that's grammatically preferable, I'm not sure. As in the past, it's our honor to dedicate this lesson to the memory of the parents of David Barry, who is behind the camera there, Mordechai ben Harav Menachem Mendel and Liba Bas Abba, and also David's father-in-law, Shmuel ben David, all of them Aleim HaShalom. So Ramban, you have source material in front of you. You can see that he was born in Girona. It says here Calabria, but that's a mistake. It should be Catalonia. Calabria is in southern Italy, but Catalonia is in northern Spain. In fact, today it's part of Spain, although they could change at some future time. But historically it was a distinct region. As I said, possibly even today it retains some distinctive characteristics. But geographically it is part of Spain. And although he lived only about 50, 60 years after Maimonides, you see his dates there. He was born in 1194, I should say. He died in 1270. Rambam, I'm not testing you, but you will remember, he was born in 1135 and died in 1204. So Ramban lived about 50 or 60 years later, but he lived in a different cultural milieu. Rambam lived in southern Spain, was born in southern Spain. He lived in an Arab, Muslim, Arabic-speaking milieu. Ramban, although he was only a couple of generations later, but he lived in a different milieu. He lived in a Christian milieu, and we'll see the relevance of that when we consider some salient features of his biography. He died in Eretz Israel in 1270. And we'll soon see the circumstances of his relocation to the land of Israel. Yosef, do you want to give David one of those annals, just in the back? He is renowned as a commentator, that is to say, a Torah commentator, also a Talmudic commentator, a Talmudist, a Kabbalist, a Halachist as well. He was a physician by profession. Actually, he studied medicine and practiced medicine as a profession. And as we say here at the top, he's popularly known as Ramban, the initials of his name, also as Nahmanides, which is a son of Nachman. The I-D-E-S in Greek means son of. Ramban was the scion of a renowned rabbinical family, a relative of Rabbeinu Yonah of Girona. Now, Girona was a kind of Jewish town. It was like the Gateshead of northern Spain. It was a suburb of Barcelona. It's about 100 kilometers from Barcelona. In fact, if you fly to Barcelona today, they may have more than one airport, but the low-cost airlines fly to Girona, which was of interest to me because I wanted to visit Girona to see the one-time hometown of Ramban, also Rabbeinu Yonah, many other great rabbis as well. And although I haven't done it yet, but maybe one day I will. And the airport that the cheap airlines fly to is actually near Girona, which suits me well. So I may miss the beach and the disco theme in Barcelona, but I'll get the Jewish heritage in Girona. Anyway, I haven't done it yet, but Amir Hashem one day. He was a younger cousin of Rabbeinu Yonah of Girona. He wrote the famous book Sharei Teshuva. And in fact, Ramban is also sometimes called Ramban mi Girona or Girundi. You may have heard that expression Girundi from Girona or Girona. He studied under Rabbi Yehuda ben Yakar and Rav Nassan ben Meir. His mentors in Kabbalah were Rav Ezra and Rav Azriel, both of Girona. Now, the truth is we don't know that much about those two personalities. We know that they were great Kabbalists. I suppose as befits a Kabbalistic master, his sort of revealed identity is not that much in the public domain of these two. They in turn were disciples of a man called Rabbi Yitzchak Sagi Nahor, Rabbi Isaac the Blind, who was the son of the Raavad, the first Ra'avad. But okay, that's a bit more by way of general background. But what is relevant is that Ramban, the Ari, said that Ramban was the last of the great earlier Kabbalists, the ones who had access to esoteric traditions that were not generally revealed. And actually, it is Ramban who is the first to introduce into general scholarly discourse aspects of the Kabbalistic tradition. Many of his passages in his commentary evidently draw on the Zohar, even though the Zohar was not revealed until after the death of Ramban, around the year 1280. By Moshe de Leon. But according to the tradition, the Zohar was known to an inner circle of cognoscenti, and Ramban was surely one of those. And as I say, many of his passages, al derech ha-sod, what he calls chen, liyodei chen. What does that mean? Any of our Kabbalists here? Yosef, what does that mean? Yodei chen. Yodei chen. Grace? Yeah, so chen means grace, but it is an acronym. Chen is chachma nisteres, the hidden wisdom. So the Ramban used that expression. He doesn't use the term Kabbalah. He calls it sod, al derech ha-sod, or al derech ha-nistar, and he says liyodei chen, which is, as I said, is a kind of pun. So his mentors, he was a disciple in Kabbalistic teachings of these two personalities, Rav Ezra and Rav Azriel. Okay, we mentioned he studied medicine, which he practiced professionally. He studied languages as well. In his commentary on the Torah, which we'll talk about shortly, he refers in a number of places to Spanish and also to Arabic. So whereas Rashi's lo azim, Rashi's recourse to foreign language is mostly Old French, but Ramban, the lingua franca in his place probably of the common man was Spanish, probably the church was Latin, but Ramban makes reference to Spanish in his commentary from time to time, also Arabic, so he evidently had some facility with Arabic as well, and perhaps other languages also. Ramban personifies the best and noblest in Spanish Jewry. His Milchamot Hashem, which he wrote in defense of Rav Yitzchak Al-Fasi, reflects the greatness of his Talmudic scholarship. Now this requires elaboration. The writings of Ramban, although he's probably best remembered as a Torah commentator, and we'll elaborate on that shortly, but much of his Torah efforts went into Talmudic scholarship. So he was not only one who, let's say, appreciated and had a profound understanding of the Torah Shebiksav, but also the vast range of Talmudic literature was all open before him. And he wrote many profound commentaries on the Talmud. In fact, I've got here, this is in 2 volumes, Chidush Ramban al-Hashas. I'll just pass it around. You can see for yourself, just flicking through the pages. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages of small Rashi script. He wrote Chidushim Navale on most of the Talmud. And in Spain, for hundreds of years, they would study Gemara with Rashi and Ramban. Whereas in Ashkenaz, we study Gemara with Rashi and Tosfos. But in Sfarad, they studied Gemara, Rashi, Ramban. Ramban was the main commentator that they turned to elaborate in a more, let's say, profound, analytical, expansive way. We've discussed Rashi, I hope you remember very well. Rashi's approach, he takes the reader by the hand, phrase by phrase. Ramban doesn't do that. Ramban says, you've got Rashi, so you have someone to take you by the hand and lead you through, but I'm going to analyze it, critique it, compare it to other passages elsewhere. So this Chidush Ramban, there are 2 volumes of this. So what our biographer mentions here in these few paragraphs, when he refers to Milchamas Hashem, so this is a commentary that Ramban wrote to defend the Rif against the animadversions of the Razai, it doesn't say who, of the Razai. Razai is Rav Zrachia Halevi. He wrote a sefer called Hamaor Hagadol. He's known as the Baal Hamaor, Rav Zrachia Halevi, and he critiqued the Rif. I don't have time to go through every personality here, but the Rif is a very important earlier commentary. We mentioned him in the past, en passant, in our studies. Maybe, as Yaakov was saying, if we're going to look at other further great Torah personalities, we could definitely do a full lecture on the Rif. But he wrote an important halachic commentary on the Talmud, and a great rabbi called Rabbi Halevi criticized him from time to time. Ramban wrote a commentary defending the Rif against the criticisms of Rabbi Halevi. He called it Milchamas Hashem. He wrote another commentary called Sefer HaZechus, which again defends the Rif against the critiques of the Ravid. Who was the Ravid? Hope you remember from last week. The Ravid, Rav Avraham ben David of Pasker, he was the great critic of the Rambam. But he also critiqued the Rif, and the Ramban defended the Rif against each of these later authorities who critiqued him. This is relevant because Ramban's orientation was to regard the earlier authorities with the utmost respect. So he especially venerated the sages, and the Rif, who tends to follow the sages quite closely. Why that is, we'll explain another time. He defended the Rif against the criticisms, as I said, of these other authorities. When we will speak in a few minutes about the Rambam and the attitude of Ramban towards Rambam, we see a similar kind of impulse. Also, the Rambam wrote, we mentioned last week, I hope you remember, the Mission of Torah, of course you remember that, and he wrote a kind of checklist, which was more than just that, but he kind of described it as a preliminary work to ensure the comprehensiveness of the Mission of Torah. What was that work?
The list.
That's right. The list was the Sefer HaMitzvot of the Rambam, and it's not just a list, 613 entries. He has an elaboration on each of the 613 mitzvot. That's the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvos. The Rambam frequently criticizes the Bahag. Bahag is Baal Halachos Gedolos. The Baal Halachos Gedolos was the first important work on the mitzvahs. And the Rambam takes issue with the Bahag, and he rejects him out of hand time and again. The Ramban jumps to the defense of the Bahag. And actually, I just realized that I brought some of my Ramban books here. I meant to bring them all, and I forgot to bring Sefer HaMitzvos, because the Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam contains the criticism of the Ramban, in which he criticizes the Rambam, but primarily to come to the defense of the Bahag, Baal Halachos Gedolos. Okay, we'll distribute some of those other books shortly. Okay, he also wrote Torah Sa'adam, a compendium of laws of mourning, and a number of halachic treatises. So the Ramban was very influential in halacha. This book, Torah Sa'adam, is especially interesting, though, because it deals with the laws. Just looking at my notes here where I have more information. It deals with the laws of mourning, but also many other aspects of the afterlife, of reward and punishment in this world and in the next world. He deals with the laws of burial. He deals with the whole subject of the transition from this world to the next world, not only in the halachic sense, but in the wider philosophical and even the Kabbalistic sense as well. So this is a good time to show you that the collected writings of Ramban have been brought together in these two volumes, published about 50 years ago or more, by Rabbi Chaim Dov Chevel. Rabbi Chevel is one of my heroes. He was an American rabbi. He was short, wore a straw hat in the summer, was clean-shaven, as I used to be till about 5 years ago. And he was a rabbi of a kind of mainstream Orthodox shul. I'm sure many of his members were probably a lot less than Orthodox, in the sort of Anglo-Jewish tradition. As I said, he was in America, but it was a similar scenario there. But he himself was an outstanding scholar, a great Talmid Chacham in the conventional sense, but also a scholar in the academic sense. And he published the Ramban. He was the first to publish Ramban in a critical edition, the commentary of Ramban in 2 volumes, the commentary on the Torah. And then he did all the works of Ramban, collected them, edited them, published them with notes and with, based on manuscripts, comparative manuscripts. And he did Rabbeinu Bechaya, and he did Sefer HaChinuch, and he did Rashi, and he did so much more. He did the Taz on his commentary on Rashi, and so much more. A remarkable man. Anyway, here you have Kisvei Ramban, and this has Torah Sa'adam, and this has various drashos. He has Koheles. He's got Sefer HaGeula, and has some responsa of Ramban, and a number of other works, Emunah Ubitachon, and some other works which we may have a chance to discuss as we go along as well. He also, Shiva also translated all of this into English. Not all of it. He translated the Ramban al-Hattori translated into English, and quite a few of the features in this book, in these two volumes, he also translated into English. I'm not sure whether they're still available. The English translation of the Torah commentary has, it must be said, been superseded by the Art Scroll people. And the Art Scroll people, I've got it over here, and we'll talk about that shortly. So I'll just pass those around. If you want to pass that on as well. Jamie, if you want to peruse that, you can give us a book review by the end of the lecture. Yeah, tell us what you think.
It's good.
Okay. Looks okay? Good. Just thumbs up. Right. Now, the little biographical sketch you have in front of you does not include a very important aspect of the Ramban's life and his life work and his contribution. And that is that in 1238, he was called upon to mediate in one of the great controversies in medieval Jewish life, and that surrounds the writings of the Rambam. We alluded to it last week, and now I'd like to elaborate a little bit further. Rambam, Maimonides, of course, was the great halachist, but he also was the great philosopher. And he wrote a book called Moreh Nevuchim, God for the Perplexed, which you all know about, and that aroused the antagonism of many other great rabbis because of its reliance on Greek philosophy, because of his adoration of Aristotle, Galen, and others. And the whole orientation was very unsettling to the Jews, of Ashkenaz, and the Jews and many Jews in Spain as well. And many great personalities. Rabbeinu Yonah, the older cousin of Ramban, was among the harsh critics of the Rambam. They denounced the writings of the Rambam. Later on, a generation or two later, the Rambam would be denounced personally as a heretic. But at this stage, they were not denouncing the man as a heretic, but they were denouncing his writings as bordering on heresy, and they felt the need to warn people against studying those writings. And it seems that they even, in some cases, consigned the writings of the Rambam to the flames. Now, you know, in those days, before the printing press, to burn a book was to destroy the labor of hundreds of hours of work, possibly more than that, very valuable, sometimes irreplaceable. So if the Ramban, if the Moreh Nevuchim was burned in a certain town, they may not get another volume, another copy of that for a generation in that town. But they felt that this was something that needed to be done, and they pronounced a cherem, and there was a counter cherem. There was a man called Rav Shlomo ben Avraham min Hahar of Montpellier, who was the great critic of the Rambam, and the followers of the Rambam put him in cherem. It was a nasty dispute. So Ramban, because of his prestige, although he was still at that time a relatively young man, but because of his stature, he essentially played the role of the conciliator. Now, what was his attitude towards the Rambam? The Ramban did not agree with the Rambam's devotion to philosophy. We'll see shortly a passage which may not have been written by Ramban, but it reflects the worldview of Ramban. He was very critical of the Rambam's reliance on the Greek philosophers, but he had great respect for the Rambam himself, nevertheless. Now, this goes back to what I said before about Ramban's respect for the earlier authorities. He respected Rambam as an earlier authority, but at the same time, he venerated the sages of the Talmud, and where the Rambam appeared to take issue with some of the teachings of the sages regarding, let's say, the existence of demons or incantations or things that we might today regard as magic, or the occult, which the Rambam, Maimonides, rejected entirely. So Ramban was very uncomfortable with that kind of attitude. So the Ramban essentially became the conciliator. He defended the Rambam, while at the same time agreeing with the critics of the Rambam that some of what he writes, like in the Meforshim Series, are difficult to understand, difficult to justify. If you take a look at the next page that you have with you, I'm not sure it's on the reverse or on the following page. So take a look at the third Hebrew paragraph there. So this is from the letters of the Ramban, and it's found in one of those volumes that I've been passing around, of the Kisvei Ramban, of the writings of Ramban. I'm sorry, I'm not aware that it's available in English, but let's see if we can get through some of this. In our community, he said, we have great, not just respect, but we have concern for the honor of Harav Hagadol, the great rabbi, which means the Rambam. We are greatly zealous on his behalf. Lichvod Torah, so for the honor of his Torah, v'chasiduso, and his piety. V'syakar tiferes gedula, so the honor of his splendorous majesty. Not because we are like prevaricating, we're saying, well, we like him in this way, we don't like him in other ways. No, we endorse him, we respect him, we admire him, we regard him with the greatest reverence. Lasumine derech mine orach, veering to the way of the path. Rabosenu yafim el hevle goyim hafilosafim. But we don't want to veer from the path of our sages to embrace the way of the philosophers. Vim yale al libam miktsas migzeraschem va'al kein sefer mor hanevuchim yachiku. Says therefore we're not enthused about the book Mor Nevuchim, God for the Prophets. Yachiku, we keep it at a distance. Umdaver b'inyanav sif sosam yadbiku. Yes, seal your lips. Those who want to speak about it, keep quiet. Seal your lips. Ki libam kimachat stakis, etc. Okay. He says their hearts are open heart they clack. Mayomru, where it's underlined. Mayomru lesefer hamada. But even if we criticize this book of the Guide for the Perplexed, but what about the Sefer Hamada? That's the first part of Mission of Torah, where he deals with philosophical concepts, theological concepts, a lot of midos. We have also the laws of Teshuva, very, very important laws. V'michtav michtav Elokim asher ha'etiku maftech l'sifrei harav b'talmud u'mavo l'chol chiburav. It's such an important work. It's like the entree to all of his other writings. It represents the basis of our belief. He says such a book is so important because the critics of the Rambam wanted to do away with that as well. They wanted to condemn that as well. So for mitzvahs Hashem asay velosas, he enumerates the commandments, the positive and the negative. Melamed talmidim kavod umora behilchos Talmud Torah. It teaches us the important principles of the laws of Torah study. Yorech hatayim derech behalachos behilchos Teshuva. He teaches the sinners how to the path back, the path of repentance in the laws of Teshuva. Okay, we'll skip a bit where it's underlined. V'chol chiburei gaonim harishonim v'achronim lo matzino sam inyanim drushim l'chol cheftzem u'mezumanim. So we don't find any earlier authorities who have written such a wonderful book, such a comprehensive book, such a lucid work. He said, how can we think of proscribing it? It's accessible to all who seek to embrace it. Kashahim meforshim umuvuarim besefer hahu hamemula bipninim, which is filled with pearls. It's a way of saying that it's valuable, it's precious. So in this passage, we see that Ramban, although he respects the sages to the point that he's not happy with the way the Rambam maybe makes short shrift of them, but at the same time, he has great respect for the Rambam as well. And ultimately, even to this day, the view of Ramban probably is what generally prevails. When it comes to halacha, the Rambam is greatly respected. When it comes to philosophy, so in many circles, the writings of the Rambam are not that widely studied. By the way, that's not only because the yeshiva world doesn't embrace philosophy and philosophical speculation so much. It's also because, remember, the Rambam's writings are based on an Aristotelian worldview. Well, Aristotle, his day has passed, already a long time ago his day has passed. So even the philosophical basis for the Rambam's writings today, from the modern perspective, look very weak. Already by the year 1500 or so, it was looking weak. So that's a further reason why the philosophical writings of the Rambam are not as widely studied today, but certainly the Rambam himself is regarded, as we have seen, because we discussed it last week, with the utmost reverence. Okay, we may have a further opportunity to consider an example of the Ramban's critique of the Rambam as well. Very interesting event in the life of Ramban happened in 1263. That's the next paragraph you have in front of you. King James of Aragon forced Ramban to hold a public religious dispute with the Jewish apostate Pablo Cristiani. Now, Pablo Cristiani was a secret weapon for the Dominicans. There were always Jews who converted to Christianity, not in large numbers generally, but under not just duress, but with great offers of reward and renown and wealth and prestige, not to mention a portion in the world to come in the Christian view. There were those who succumbed to the blandishments. Most of those people, you won't be surprised to hear, were not very learned, were not scholars, were not sophisticated people. They were possibly a bit down and out, who weren't maybe so successful or so well regarded in the Jewish world, so they didn't have that much to lose. But there was a rare instance of this Pablo Cristiani, whose real name I can't remember. They called him Pablo Cristiani when he became an apostate. He was not an Am Haaretz. I don't say he was a Talmid Chacham, but he was not an Am Haaretz. He had some Jewish learning. In his youth, he must have, we would say today, gone to yeshiva or whatever it might be. And they felt, the Dominicans felt, they've got a secret weapon. Because all of these disputations they have, they get a bishop or a priest or someone like that who may be knowledgeable in Latin and Greek and in the New Testament. He knows a bit of Old Testament, maybe from the Vulgate or from the Septuagint Greek translation, but he doesn't really understand Hebrew and he doesn't have knowledge of the rabbinic tradition. So even though I had these disputes quite often, always under duress, but they didn't feel that they could really score a knockout blow because the Jews would say, well, our tradition is different than your tradition. Now they feel we've got a secret weapon. We've got a Christian, devotee who is knowledgeable about the oral Torah as well. So they wheeled him out and they challenged Ramban to a disputation. Well, it didn't go for the Dominicans quite as they thought it would. In the presence of King James and many dignitaries and clerics, Ramban completely demolished his opponent with the logic of his arguments. Now, what was notable about this disputation was one of the few occasions where it was overseen by the king, and the king guaranteed freedom of speech. The king said to the disputants, we want this to be a fair exchange. And therefore, the rabbi is allowed to speak his mind. And he doesn't have to be concerned about causing offense, because if so, then he's got his hands tied behind him. And any victory on the part of the church will be undermined. It will be lame, because the rabbi wasn't able to really, speak his mind. So therefore, and the church agreed to it because they thought they could prevail. Well, it didn't work out for them that way. And as a result, Ramban completely demolished his opponent. And in admiration, the king rewarded him with a gift of 300 ducats. The Dominican priest claimed that their side had won the dispute, whereupon Ramban wrote a book called Sefer HaVikuach. It's in one of those volumes, I forget which one of those, the first or second volume. Sefer HaVikuach is there. That is Ramban's account, and it's I don't know if it's verbatim, but it's an account of the whole exchange. It happened over 2 or 3 days, maybe a bit longer, and it's like the protocol of the account of the debate is included there. It makes fascinating reading. 1 year, long time ago, it was Shavuos night, would have been like probably 1982, 83. I took it upon myself to learn the Sefer HaVikuach through the night on Shavuos night. That's what I did, and I enjoyed it very much. It was fascinating, very rewarding. Don't test me on it now, but I remember enjoying it very much. I actually do remember some parts of it. And you could possibly, if you're interested, you could possibly find it online. I wouldn't be surprised if it's available in English online. But in any case, that is the Ramban's account. Some very interesting, very candid exchanges there about the origins of Christianity and whether Jesus was the Messiah and the proof that he was and the proof that he wasn't. But then, because he published this account, so the Dominicans accused Ramban of charged him with humiliating the Catholic religion, which is probably true. So as a result, he was banished from Aragon. Now the king supported him because the king was there and the king knew that it was a faithful account. By the way, there does exist a Latin account of it as well, but it's not as complete. The king supported Ramban, but then the Dominicans got the Pope involved, and the king thought it doesn't pay to fight with the Pope. Let's just send the rabbi on his way. So he had to flee. And that is how the Ramban made his way to the land of Israel. Okay, we'll talk about Ramban and Eretz Yisrael shortly. Okay, Ramban began to write his major work, the Commentary on the Torah, in which he offered a penetrating analysis and exegesis of the text, highlighting the moral and ethical lessons to be derived from it. On many occasions, he introduced midrashic and Kabbalistic expositions, evidence of his surpassing greatness in both the revealed and esoteric aspects of the Torah. Now, the Ramban's Perush, and I remember mentioning this when we spoke about Rashi, is, I think, second only to Rashi in its influence, in its popularity. If you turn to the last page in your collection, you'll see in the upper right-hand segment, or quadrant rather, this is a facsimile of the first edition of Ramban. It was printed in Rome prior to 1480. Now, I won't quiz you, but I wonder, for extra credit, does anybody remember the first Hebrew book ever printed in the history of the printing press was Rashi. Rashi's Commentary on the Torah. It was printed in 1475. This was printed in Rome prior to 1480. So within 5 years maximum, they printed already the commentary of Ramban, which was 200 years after his death. But they printed it, which again shows how not only popular, but how important it was, how highly regarded it was. It was among the very first Hebrew books ever to be printed within a few years after the first Hebrew book printed, which was not by accident Rashi's commentary. So Ramban really is next to Rashi, and his style is very different than Rashi. Firstly, he often quotes Rashi and frequently takes issue with Rashi. He analyzes Rashi and he disagrees with Rashi. But in general, whereas Rashi explains every phrase or every problematic passage, Rashi will speak up about. Rashi quotes, as we've seen, Midrashim, etc. Ramban has a different style. Ramban does what Rashi does not do, in the sense that he will take up a theme. He elaborates. Rashi's comments are usually limited to sometimes a few words, sometimes a few lines at the most, Rashi's comments. Ramban frequently will write at much greater length. He'll write sometimes like a mini essay on a single pasuk. And he has certain themes which he develops in his Torah commentary, certain themes which are very important. For example, he writes a lot about the importance of the land of Israel. And that is why he made his way to the land of Israel at the end of his life. It wasn't only because he had to flee, although I'm sure that was the sort of compulsion that forced him out. But he was 72 years old when he traveled to the land of Israel. It was not an easy journey for a man at that time, at that age. But he had a great love of Eretz Yisrael. He writes in a number of places about the importance of the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel. The Rambam, Nahmanides, does not list living in the land of Israel among the positive commandments. The religious Zionists have never forgiven him for that. But Ramban does. Ramban listed among the mitzvahs that the Maimonides forgot. He says, yeah, you left one out. You left out that one of the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel. And in his commentary also, the Ramban says this is a mitzvah aseh. We don't need to go into details of exactly where it is. That's what Ramban writes. And we'll mention another beautiful example in a short while. He writes about nature, the nature of nature. That is to say, whether nature is part of the necessity of the universe, or it was created by God in a miraculous fashion. Ramban is of the view, one of his very famous themes is that there's no such thing as nature. Nature is a series of miracles. There are open miracles and there are hidden miracles. The doctrine of Nes Nistar is a very important theme in Ramban. Another theme, Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim. It's mentioned in the Medrash, but Ramban elevates this to a much higher level. That means the experiences of the fathers are a portent for the children. Especially in the book of Bereshis, the Ramban mentions it many times. Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim. I have a friend who many years ago published a book, it's only about 50 pages, which is a collection, it's really just like a checklist of the most important passages in Ramban on the Torah that relate to Emunah and Bitachon. Basically, it's all of the most interesting, most fundamental, most fascinating passages of Ramban. And I wanted to bring it to you tonight. I looked on my shelf and I remember that I lent it to my daughter Yocheved because she's teaching Ramban in seminary in Jerusalem and she couldn't get hold of it, so I lent her mine. And I should have be sure to get it back, which I didn't, so she has it. But my friend who published, he's written a number of other svarim as well, told me that is among his most popular, I think it's his most popular book, and he said he's reprinted it many times. As I said, it's only about 50 pages, and it's listed by parsha. So every parsha of the Torah, the most important, the most fundamental passages in Ramban can be found there. So this is a feature of Ramban. Excuse me?
Remember its name?
Yeah, it's called, I think something like Inyanei Emunah Uvitachon Be Perish Ramban Al HaTorah. Something like that. It's written by someone called Fried, Rachmiel Fried. So, Ramban's Perish on the Torah is a completely different style than Rashi, and as I say, is almost the indispensable companion to Rashi. Many commentaries have been written on Ramban's commentary on the Torah, and many great personalities have built on the Ramban. Chassam Sofer and many others have made the Ramban like the basis of their perspective on understanding the Torah itself. I can just pass this around. Now this is 2 volumes as well of the Ramban al HaTorah. I'll just start this way. It's the Chevelle edition. I mentioned that Ramban also is the first to weave Kabbalistic teachings into his Torah commentary. So here we have a commentary that quickly became very popular, very respected, and became an indispensable entree to the study of the Torah, the Chumash itself. And he has quite a lot of Kabbalistic ideas which are woven into there. He says, Al derech hanistar. The only thing is that in his introduction, which by the way, his introduction is very worthwhile to read the introduction of Ramban to the Torah, because there he explains something beautiful which also exemplifies his Kabbalistic approach, in which he says that the Torah itself, the 5 books of the Torah are collectively one of the names of God. He says the whole Torah is a series of names of God, and the Torah in itself is one of the names of God. He says that's why a Sefer Torah which is missing one letter is puzzle, because the name of God, it's like the Torah is the means by which we can encounter Hashem, not only in our lives, but even in terms of like the embodiment of Hashem in this world is through the Torah. It's a very beautiful passage, a very profound passage, but towards the end, he writes the following, and some have I've got the wrong volume here. Sorry, this was just the English one of, which you may have seen, maybe you have it already, of Bamidbar, but this one I want to read you from. Yeah, some have expressed some frustration at the Art Scroll people who have done an excellent job, but they don't translate those Kabbalistic passages, which leaves some students, perhaps understandably, feeling shortchanged. He writes at the end that the uninitiated will see in our commentary novel explanations and expositions. Let them take to heart this admonition uttered by our holy sages. Just parenthetically, this passage comes from the Medrash. It's mentioned in the Gemara in Chagiga, but it is derived from a book called Sefer Ben Sira, which is part of the Apocrypha. But we'll discuss that maybe another time. He ends with this pitgam. Bigadol mimcha al tidrosh, that which is greater than you, do not investigate. Bechazak mimcha al tachkor, that which is stronger than you, do not probe. B'mufla mimcha bal teda, that which is beyond you, do not seek to know. B'mechusa mimcha bal tishal, about that which is concealed from you, do not inquire. B'mashehu sheisa hisbonan, contemplate that which you are permitted to study. Ein lecha esek benistaros, you have no concern with hidden matters. So, even though he says to the reader that he's going to incorporate some esoteric teachings, but don't think that you understand it. Unless you've been initiated into the secrets of the Kabbalah, then better just leave it and recognize the limitations of your understanding. It may sound a little bit patronizing, but probably he knew of what he was speaking. So this is what Ramban writes in his introduction. So his commentary on the Torah remains an absolutely indispensable basis. And my personal experience doesn't define anything for anyone, but I'll just tell you that when I was a teenager and I decided I need to study Rashi's commentary on the Torah, I learned it for about 3 years, for 3 consecutive years. I think the 3rd year or the 4th year maybe, I did Rashi's commentary with one of the super commentaries on Rashi. And then I decided I'm ready for Ramban. And I did Ramban. It took me 2 years to do it. And then a few years later, I reviewed it again. And a few years later, I reviewed it again. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just saying that for me personally, I found Ramban's commentary so important, so valuable. And that's why I've actually passed around this volume. I'm not trying to sort of say anything special about myself, but if you look through it, you can see that, at least in my case, it's richly annotated because I had to study it with a pencil and even pen in hand in order to feel as if I was nurturing a resource that I could draw upon in my own studies and in my teaching, and Halavai should take it to heart as well. Because there are a lot of musar in it, a lot of principles of not just Torah study, but life itself, which one can discover through the profound and eloquent and compelling comments of Ramban. Let's continue with the final paragraph here, and then we'll go a bit further as well. In 1267, at age 72, Ramban settled in Eretz Yisrael. Finding Jerusalem in utter desolation in the wake of the Crusaders' excesses, he began to rebuild the devastated Jewish community. His commentary on the Torah is studied widely. It is printed in all editions of Mikraot Gedolot, and as we've observed, it was printed only a few years after Rashi's commentary. If you look again on this page here, we saw the facsimile. Beneath it is a page of the Steno Mikraot Gedolos, where you see the commentary of Ramban, and it, as we keep saying, is the second to Rashi, will be found in so many printings of the Chumash itself. So Ramban finished his commentary in Eretz Yisrael, and Rabbi Chevelle in his introduction goes to some lengths to seek and to identify a few subtle hints that reveal to us that he wrote his commentary, at least finished his commentary, once he had arrived in the land of Israel.
And he lived there for 3 years.
He only lived there for 3 years. Yeah, he must have worked on it, before that as well. He possibly, maybe sort of edited it when he was there. Correct. And of course, he was already 72 years old, which in those days was quite advanced in age. I just mentioned his disciples. His major disciples were the Rashba, Rav Shlomo ibn Aderet, and Rav Aharon Halevi of Barcelona. Those were two of his major disciples. His grandson, you may have heard of, his grandson was called Ralbag, known as Gersonides. That was the grandson, the son of his daughter, was Rabbi Levi ben Gershom. It's interesting, Rav Aaron Halevi, Rav Aaron Halevi of Barcelona, was a descendant of Rav Zrachia Halevi, who, if you remember, we said the Ramban was devoted to defending the Rif against Rav Zrachia Halevi's criticism. Anyway, his descendant was a leading disciple of Ramban. But, okay, these are some of the important personalities. Now, what happened to Ramban in the land of Israel? So he arrived in Jerusalem on the 9th of Elul, 1267. Or maybe that's when he arrived in Akko. He disembarked in Akko, and the 9th of, I think in Akko. He landed in Akko in the 9th of Elul, 1267. And from there he made his way to Jerusalem. If you take a look at the right-hand passage there, the right-hand paragraph, he set sail for Eretz Yisrael. Arriving in Jerusalem, he found a desolate city bearing the ravages of war and spoilage, because he was there at the time of the crusade, well, after the Crusaders had ravaged the land, and then the Muslims were fighting back, and it was war-torn, and it was a place of devastation, the whole country. As Ramban describes in one of his letters, "And what shall I tell you of the land? For it is deserted and desolate. The greater the sanctity of the place, the greater its desolation. Jerusalem more ravaged than all other parts, and Judea more than Galilee. Yet despite the havoc, it is a good land. The inhabitants of Jerusalem are close to 2,000 in number altogether. Of them, some 300 Christians who fled before the sword of the Sultan. Among the inhabitants, none are of Israel, for these have fled since the coming of the Tartars. Only 2 brothers, dyers by profession, carry on their trade here, and to these there gather up to a minyan for prayer on the Sabbath." They just about got together a minyan once a week on Shabbos in Jerusalem when Ramban arrived, a bit like Kesher. We have urged them, I think Kesher is a bit better than that, Baruch Hashem. We have urged them on and found a devastated building with marble pillars and a handsome dome and turned it into a house of prayer. Ramban evidently came with some money from Spain. Maybe he still had the king's 300 ducats, and it was enough to buy a piece of land and a building that was dilapidated, and they refurbished it. And Ramban describes how he encouraged the people to get together because they had no shul even. They would just meet at the home of these brothers. So he said, look, in time for Rosh Hashanah, we need to get it together. So I don't think they renovated in time for Rosh Hashanah, but I think he may have even gone. He went back to Akko. I don't know if he went back before Rosh Hashanah, but he did go back to Akko. Akko at that time was the main Jewish settlement in the land. Akko, you know where Akko is? It's near Haifa. Haifa is the modern city, which is around the bay from Akko, which is an ancient city. In medieval times, there was a yeshiva in Akko, founded by Rabbi Yehuda Paris. Any Frenchies here tonight? No Frenchies. Yes, we do, of course. Rabbi Yehuda Paris, he fled in 1240. He had a disputation with Nicholas Donin, who was another Jewish apostate, and in Paris, and he had to flee also because of the outcome of that debate. And he went to Akko with a number of Talmidim, and his yeshiva was still functioning. I don't know if he was still alive then, probably not. And that's where Ramban returned to Akko, having visited Jerusalem and having encouraged the local community to get their act together. And he then returned to Akko, and he died in Akko about 3 years later. We don't know exactly where he's buried. Some say he's buried in Haifa, which is nearby to Akko, of course. Some say he's buried in Hebron, near the Maras HaMachpelah. We don't really know for sure. But we do know that he definitely made his way to the land of Israel, which is not the case with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, where the legend says he did, but we don't know for sure. actually whether he did or did not. Ramban definitely did. We have letters that he wrote from the land of Israel, and I'm going to tell you more about that building that he renovated in order to build a shul as well. Because that shul, which he acquired in 1267, was rededicated in 1967, exactly 700 years later. Because that shul remained an important place. Ramban, they davened there for a long time. Then it was closed down in the 1500s because the Ottomans wouldn't allow it. And then they reopened it again in 1700. A man called Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, not the same Yehuda HaChassid that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, but a different one. And he came from Poland, and he was a bit of a messianic pretender, and he came with about 500 devotees who were agitating to bring Mashiach. Unfortunately, Yehuda HaChassid died a few months later, and kind of disillusioned his followers. Okay, we're getting there. So Yehuda HaChassid is the one, his followers, they bought that land where Ramban shul had been built a few hundred years before. They bought it and they renovated it. But they borrowed money, they were deep in debt, and they didn't pay the debts, and the Muslims came and they trashed the place, they burned it down. So it became known as the Churva. Churva means a ruin. And it was ultimately rebuilt subsequently, and it was the great synagogue of Jerusalem for for a long time. And its heyday was roughly 1850 to 1948, roughly. And at that time, it was the main shtibel. It was also the grand synagogue. In London terms, it was like the cross between St. John's Wood Synagogue and the Rav Chuna's shtibel here in Golders Green. They had a minion factory there all the time, and they had learning there all the time, but they also had all the great public gatherings were there, and the sort of civic events were there. When Herbert Samuel, I'm getting a bit away from Ramban, but when he came to what was then Palestine on behalf of the British Mandate, so he walked from his place in Rehavia to the old city of Jerusalem, and they gave him maftir in the what was still known as the Churva, and he wore an English top hat, and I thought it was going to be a great thing. Well, it didn't work out so wonderfully, but in any case, that was the legacy of this Ramban shul. Became known as the Churva, was known as the Churva for hundreds of years. In 1967. In 1948, the Jordanians trashed it again, burned it down, and trashed it, left it as a ruin. In 1967, when the Israel Defense Forces took over reclaimed the old city of Jerusalem, so they cleared away the rubble. I mean, not immediately, but within a few weeks or months, they cleared away the rubble, and they rededicated it as a shul. Now, the Ramban shul was down below, because the Ottomans wouldn't allow them to build it high. They had to build it low. It was literally under the ground. But what they did, within a few months or a few years maybe after 1967, they built a big arch, which was a local landmark for many years. I remember it very well, to indicate the height of the original shul. Before, when the Jordanians trashed it in 1940, it was a big, beautiful synagogue. It was among the most beautiful buildings in the whole country. It was praised by visitors, including non-Jewish visitors. It was a very ornate, beautiful building. The architect was recorded as well. I mean, it was a major project. It was donated from someone from Philadelphia, donated something of note there. I mean, it was a project that, Israel is always good at fundraising, even before the State of Israel. So it was and anyway, the Jordanians trashed it, so the Israeli government, so they weren't sure what to do with it, how to rebuild it. So in the meantime, they built an arch, and that became known as the Churva. The arch was the height of the original synagogue, and this is a postcard that illustrates what it looked like until about 5 years ago, when, after decades of arguing and delays and politics and prevarication and money, that's right, this typical scenario, they decided to rebuild it. And they rebuilt it in a way that was broadly similar to the way it had looked originally. Now it's a big, modern, beautiful building. It's a wonderful shul there. And you can go and visit. And that is on the same site as the original Ramban synagogue from 1267.
Is that still underneath then?
So they have excavated underneath it. So the Ramban was actually a bit like next door to it, and I think it has also been restored. And the rabbi there is the rabbi of the Kotel, Rabbi Nebenzahl, is the rabbi of the Ramban show, but it's basically the same site. So it's very appointed in that regard. Our time is nearly up, but I want to have a chance to look at some of these other passages as well. Now, with regard to the state of the land of Israel when Ramban arrived in 1267, there's a beautiful passage in his commentary to the book of Vayikra in the Tochacha. So Parshas B'chukosai, we read it just a few weeks ago, includes the rebuke. The rebuke is a harrowing series of prophecies that in which the Torah foresees the upheaval and the catastrophes, calamities of Jewish life. Within that, we have the following phrase. It says, "V'af gam zos, b'yosem be'eretz oivehem, lo ma'astim v'lo ga'altim." No, I'm sorry. That is true as well. But the pasuk says, "V'af gam zos." It says, "V'shamamu aleha oiveichem." The land will be desolate. V'shamamu aleha oiveichem. Your enemies will become desolate within the land. The land will be so desolate, will become so destroyed, so unproductive, that even your enemies who have kicked you out, they will also be desolate. Says Ramban in a very astute comment. He says that this is a note of consolation for the Jewish people. That when you are in exile, and you're in Italy, you're in Spain, you're in Yemen, you're in Iraq, you're looking to the land of Israel, which is 100 or 1,000 miles away, and you are pining for it, and you're remembering the glory days, at least you will have the satisfaction that those enemies who turfed you out, they're not having any great time there either. They're not building it up, and they're not celebrating, meaning they haven't accomplished great things there. That's what Ramban says. Chaim Doshevel was a great Zionist, but that's just by the by. But he writes in his notes, he has some further notes at the back, and he says, Ramban says, "Ki me'az yatzanu mimena lo kabbalah." From the time that we left it, the land did not sustain any other nation, any other language. The land would not allow anyone else to kind of get a foothold there and prosper in that land, because it's our land. Says Chevel, Nishma kan heid kolot shel hamilchamot hashonot she'avru al eretz hakadosha b'tkufat Rabbeinu. Here we can hear the echo of the sound of the many wars that took place in the land of Israel in the days of Rabbeinu, of Ramban. He says, the Christians conquered the land, the Crusaders, starting in 1096 and subsequently, but they didn't last long. Already Salah ad-Din, do you remember we said Rambam was the court physician of Salah ad-Din, possibly. Salah ad-Din was the one who conquered the land of Israel, and he defeated the Crusaders, the Christians. So the Crusaders didn't, and anyway, even before Salah ad-Din, there were bloody battles there for decades. Gam hatatarim ba'u shama v'lo yachlu lahachzik et haaretz. Then the Tartars came; they did not succeed. Vayishmaelim, and the Arabs who held on to it for centuries, they never found any success there. Ela hosifu lechurbanah. They just added to its desolation. Today, you can still see Crusader ruins in the land of Israel. You can hardly see any Arab ruins. They never built anything in the first place because they were just Bedouins. They were just going from place to place, and the Yishmaelim never did anything great there. They only took an interest in it, of course, when the Zionist movement began to seek to resettle the land of Israel on behalf of the Jewish community. I don't want to get political, but most of the Arabs, most of the Palestinians are descended from Egyptians, Iraqis, Kuwaitis, and others who came to Palestine because the Brits gave them jobs to build the railroad from Cairo to Damascus. So they needed manpower, so there was jobs, so they came for that. Otherwise, there was hardly anyone there. The land was very underpopulated because it couldn't sustain anyone, because of what Ramban says, because the land of Israel only flourishes when the Jews are there. It's a very beautiful, poignant comment that we can see in Ramban's remarks. So you can find it in, if you want to look it up, make a note of it, you can find it in his comments to chapter 26, Leviticus chapter 26, verse 16 at the end of that passage. There you see his remarks, I believe. In just a couple of minutes that we have left, let's take a look at some of these other passages. So if we look at the one that with just the Hebrew, so the top passage there, so this is part of the lyrical introduction of Ramban, to like the lyrical prelude to his introduction. We've looked at this in a different context earlier. Let's see it again very briefly. Perushe Rabbeinu Shlomo Ateres Tzvi Utzviras Tifara. The crown of delight and the diadem of glory. This is Rabbeinu Shlomo. Who is Rabbeinu Shlomo? Rashi. That's right. Muchtar b'nimuso b'mikra b'mishnah v'gemara, crowned with fine etiquette in Torah, in Mishnah, in Gemara. Lo mishpat habechora. To him goes the right of the firstborn. The role of the firstborn goes to Rashi, because he's the first and the greatest. Bidvarav ehegeh, with love, I will contemplate his words. B'havasam eshgeh, with love of them will I be intoxicated. V'imahim yelanu masa umatan, but we're going to have an exchange with Rashi. I love him. I'm intoxicated by the delight and the profundity and the authenticity of his explanations, but I'm going to have an exchange with him. Drisha v'chakira, to explore and to investigate, to research. B'fshatav v'midrashav v'chol agada b'tzura asher b'fershev zechura, with the fortified to understand Rashi's comments. But here's one of my favorite phrases. Ramban says in my commentary, I'm also going to take up very often the writings of Ibn Ezra. Remember him? We did him a few weeks ago. V'im Rabbi Avraham ben Ezra tia lanu tochachat mugula v'ahava mesutara. Open rebuke and hidden love. Which, in that beautiful, simple phrase, encapsulates the balance in which Ramban very frequently laces into Ibn Ezra and even excoriates him. But he says there is hidden love, open rebuke and hidden love. Now the next passage is the most interesting one. Now, Ramban is associated with a book called Igeret HaKodesh. It's really a booklet, Igeret HaKodesh, the Holy Letter. The Holy Letter, my friends, is about marital relations. And he doesn't mean it, though, in a euphemistic way, because he does regard the subject as a holy subject. And it makes fascinating reading. It has long been attributed to Ramban. It's unlikely that it was written by Ramban himself. It probably came from his Beit Midrash, though, that is to say, from his students, from his followers. And it reflects his perspective. It's interesting that Ramban, who is the Kabbalist, takes issue with Rambam, the philosopher, for Rambam's negative view of this subject. Because, says Ramban, the rabbis saw in the sexual union great holiness, great meaning. They saw it as an act of unification, and the unification between two people is a metaphor for the cleaving of the Jewish people to Hashem and the relationship between the body and the soul. But he didn't see it only as a metaphor. He saw it as something to be experienced in the context of a marital union. Rambam, Maimonides, was influenced by Aristotle, and actually Aristotle took a very dim view of marital relations. Take a look at this passage, which is in the Hebrew only. Ki chibur, and we're reading where it's on it. Ki chibur zehu inyan kadosh. Chibur is the term he uses for sexual union, is a holy matter. V'naki It is pure, it is clean when it is conducted in accordance with the right manner. A person should not think that this subject is somehow disgraceful or ugly. Chalila mizeh. Heaven forbid. And the matter is not the way Nahmanides thought in his book, Guide for the Perplexed, where he praises Aristotle. Al-Masha Amar, regarding that which Aristotle said, Kichush hamishush hu cherpa lanu. The sense of touch, sensuality is cherpa, is a disgrace for us. That's what the Rambam wrote, influenced by Aristotle. Chalila, chalila, ein hadavar k'ma'amar hayivani. The matter is not like the Greek says. Lefi sheish b'mamra zeh shemetz minus shenu murgash, etc. So this is one of the passages, but there are many other passages where Rambam takes issue with Ramban because of his influence and his sort of endorsement of the philosophical matters. Our time is nearly up, so I think we should stop here. I would just mention, so on the final page, you have two passages, and of course they're selected from so many possible candidates. Beautiful passages in the writings of the Ramban. It's interesting that the top one is about hardening Pharaoh's heart, and although he doesn't say so explicitly, this comes from the Rambam. What Ramban writes here comes from the Rambam. So here's an example where he endorses an opinion which is developed by the Rambam. And then the second passage is, again, we mentioned earlier about Nahmanides' view of the hidden miracles, in which he says that the hidden miracles are represent the pathway to understanding divine providence. I'll just read the first couple of lines and we'll end with that. Through the great, well-known miracles, a person recognizes the hidden miracles that constitute the basis of the entire Torah. For no one can have a part in the Torah of Moses, our teacher, unless he believes that all events and occurrences that happen to us are supernatural and metaphysical phenomena. And this is an idea that Ramban develops in a number of places, and again, it's one of his very well-known contributions to Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy, and I cannot commend to your attention highly enough the writings of Ramban, whether on the Torah or anywhere else. Thank you very much for listening.